All right, let's start looking at interest groups today. And I know we looked at them yesterday. I want you to get an understanding of, how interest groups play a role, and I think that's huge. I think that linkage aspect is just very, very big. So you can't just say, hey, I know what an interest group is. We got to be able to link them to policy making. We got to be able to link them to elections. And if you can link those to elections and policy making, you'll probably be good for the AP. If you can't, if you just know them as standalone, you probably won't be. So some of the information yesterday was just hopefully being able to link that stuff a little bit and seeing how they may play a role. Today is just going to be a little bit of history stuff, I guess. But not necessarily history, but whatever. We talked about this already yesterday. I think you probably already got this definition down. And then I took you to the interest group website. Now that is, again, Open Secrets is a good site when it comes to stuff. And if you want to look at PACs, you want to look at interest groups, that's a good site to go to. They have this stuff listed. They'll show how much money that they give in elections. They have the definition of a lobbyist too, someone who's going to work for that interest group on behalf of that interest group, trying to convince members of Congress or whatever legislative body it is. It might be a state legislature or whatever. They want to get things for their interest group. I gave you that assignment yesterday. Remember, that's going to be due on Monday. And again, that's going to give you more details on it. I think that's a really good reading on interest group and then how they try to influence stuff and what they try to do. When it comes to interest groups, we got tons of them in America. And part of it is freedom. And we looked at what Madison had said earlier. It's impossible. People are going to form together in groups, when you're free to do those things. Remember, he said, you can eliminate factions by, taking away freedom, but that's probably not a good thing. Or we could give everybody the same views, but obviously that's not a realistic view. But because we have so many divisions within society over lots of different interests, that we just have lots of, potential for interest groups. We also have the concept of federalism, where the states make a lot of powers, the states make a lot of laws and stuff too. So your interest group can be effective. Even if they can't be at the national level, they may be able to get what they want done at the state level. So there's access to government with federalism. It may be hard to access Washington, D.C., but it's not nearly as hard to access here. So because there's access by people, that we have more influence on government than if we were like just a unitary system instead of a federalism. And because our political parties are not exceptionally strong, we think of, hey, we only got two parties, but our parties, they don't pick the candidates, they don't get to make the laws, and we do know that there is party division, and our political parties are not nothing. It's not like they're completely ineffectual by any stretch. But the parties don't, members of Congress don't have to go what the party wants them to do. They can vote differently. They can look out for the interests of their states, and they often do. So when you have stronger parties, then your interest groups have less influence. When you have weaker parties, a system with weaker parties, then your interest groups can be more influential. And our parties are weaker than parties maybe in other countries that focus on, remember, parties in lots of other democracies are more, I wouldn't say they're single issue parties, but they're not as ideological as the two major parties that we have in the United States. So all of those things lead to, just the environment for more interest groups to be created. And I think interest groups are a tremendous aspect of our system, but they also can be detrimental in ways, or at least negative ways, because the interest groups are looking out for their interests, and that's good for us. I mean, in democracy, shouldn't the people have a say? However, if interest groups are too influential, they may be protecting the interests of you guys, and laws may be made that benefit you, but may not be good for society as a whole. And let's use gun rights. If you believe that we should have greater regulations on guns because you think it would make it safer, the NRA is a powerful group, and they seem to have a lot of influence on stuff. And if you think that, and even if a majority of people, and I don't know if this is a true statement, but let's say a majority of people think that there should be maybe some more gun laws, maybe it's harder to get a gun or something like that. If that interest group is pushing hard for, if the NRA is saying, no, we want none, then that may not be representing a majority of people. Again, I don't know what the majority of people poll on this. I'm not trying to hammer the NRA by any stretch of the imagination, but we could pick any interest group if they're more influential than what they should be. And they may be. Interest groups may be more influential than they should be, depending on how much money they give candidates or how vocal they are. Why the rise in interest groups? Well, we have a lot more now than we did, historically. Economic developments create new interest groups. You think of this, and we can think of this through lots of different ways, but, with farmers, well, previously, back in the old days, farmers were producing basically for themselves and really maybe only selling into town if they were selling their surplus. But essentially they were, in the 1800s, especially early 1800s, farmers were just producing goods to just survive. They were living on their own, self-sufficient. But when things started to change, when all of a sudden it was easier to transport stuff and technology improved and you could produce more grain, all of a sudden now that farmers now had a market somewhere else, so other issues started to become important. Free trade with other nations. When we have a surplus of grain, all of a sudden free trade is important to farmers. Okay? Or, the fact that maybe free trade is bad. Country of origin labeling. Think of that in a sense where beef producers in the United States. Well, if you go buy beef, it doesn't say on the beef where that beef was made. At least unless the country of origin thing is passed. I don't think it did. But, it doesn't say made in America. It could be Canadian beef, it could be Argentinian beef, could be U.S. beef. Well, the farm groups want of country of origin labeling on beef. Why? Well, then if you're sitting in a store and you see, well, here's some hamburger and this is in Argentina, and you go to another store and say, hey, this came from the United States, maybe you buy that United States stuff. The free trade or the trade with other countries develop some of those kind of issues. So trading with other countries make a difference. Meat inspections or different kind of inspection things, how closely do I inspect it? How long can beef set out, before it becomes too old or whatever? Farm subsidies are huge. What kind of subsidies do we want? And that's just one example, and we could probably think of hundreds of examples of stuff. Before the internet, we never had net neutrality concerns, right? And that's what Congress is working on now. And should we have taxes on the internet? And right now, the way things are, if you order something from another state, if you order on Amazon, and it's coming from, Utah, there's no taxes on it. And you have to pay shipping, but you don't have to pay taxes. Okay, now, that's good for, I like that. I buy it because I hate shopping. So if I can do my shopping on Amazon, life is good for me. And plus, if I don't have to pay the taxes, but I may have to pay shipping, but they may negate each other out. If I have to pay taxes and shipping, all of a sudden it may cost me more to buy that same product online. Maybe it's worth my time to run into town and go buy it, right? So local businesses are saying, hey, we want to have an internet tax on this because people are buying more things from other places. But on the other hand, if I'm a business and I'm selling things locally, but I'm also selling them online, which a lot of businesses do, it may expand my market. Think of like used booksellers. Used booksellers, maybe you don't go buy books much, but I buy a lot of books. I used to go to used bookstores all the time. But you'd go through used bookstores, they don't have, they oftentimes don't even know what they have, so you just kind of glance around. But now, used booksellers put all their stuff online, and now their market is not just the people that live around here, their market is everybody in the United States. But they're competing with other used booksellers, but nonetheless, it expanded their market. So you got to look at different groups. Who do they benefit from this? So when the internet becomes a tool, then all of a sudden now it becomes groups are interested in that. And there's going to be lots of examples of those things. Before we had credit cards, we didn't worry about consumer protection laws, usury laws. South Dakota has very, very lax usury laws. Why? Well, because we wanted to bring the banking industry to South Dakota, and it's worked. We have like Citibank and Wells Fargo here. I mean, not just branches, but we have, divisions here. To get them here, we had to cut usury laws or say, basically charge whatever rate you want. So those become issues as new things come up. And new things are always coming up in society, Government policy creates interest groups. When we go to war, well, now all of a sudden we have more war veterans. And then those war veterans, and you have veterans groups that are looking out for the needs and issues of soldiers who are coming back from war. And we've had a lot of wars, and we've had wars for, we've been at war for the last decade or more. So we have veterans groups, we have things like that. So we start to have, sometimes it's a policy made by government or things that government does that leads to the creation of more interest groups. Sometimes social circumstances lead to interest groups. Slavery or anti-slavery, abortion. What do you think probably would be one today? Maybe a relatively new one. I would think so. I would think that gay rights or gay marriage one, not new like just yesterday new, but certainly newer than the abortion issue. And there are groups, interest groups that are dealing with pro-choice, pro-life thing. But probably within the last maybe 10 years, we start to see interest groups dealing with same-sex marriage and issues like that. Okay, so sometimes social circumstances create some of those things. Are you going too fast? Okay. I'll leave that one. Nope. Nope. See, I think, here's my personal opinion on Social Security. I know the Republicans say, the Republican Party, or not, I don't even know if it's the Republican Party, I don't know if it's fair to say. It's usually never the Democrats, but some Republicans are saying, it's your money, take it and invest it yourself. The government shouldn't be taking it out and holding it for you. It's your money, use it yourself, and then take care of yourself when you're older. And that makes sense. But I don't know if we'd all do that. In society that makes sense if all of us will take that money, but how many of you would take money out and save it for that rainy day when you're old? And some of you would say, yeah, I will. And some of us would say, no, I would not. I would. My wife absolutely would not. I guarantee it. We have different ideas on how to spend money. I'm a hoarder when it comes to money. She's a spender. And we've worked out some things over the years, but nonetheless, you can't assume that everyone will say, all right, I will invest this in a retirement account. And then it'll be there. So if everyone does not, if we do the opt-out and just, you can opt out and not do it, it means you're going to have more money each month. But what are we doing if you guys are the ones that decide not to? And now, again, we have the same problem again. You're 70 years old, you're 80 years old, you can't work anymore, people won't hire you. And you're destitute. Our families aren't as big as they used to be. It used to be, families would take care of you. Grandma and grandpa, come live with me. Well, we don't do that anymore. But it's not to the same extent as we used to. What do? Let you live out in the street and die? And that was a problem that we were having prior to Social Security, is that there's got to be something to take care of some of these people here. So Social Security was put into effect to solve that problem. If we opt out on it, and some people would like us to do that, and it may even make sense. We're going to have a lot that don't do that responsible thing. That's not a bad question at all. The more activities the government undertakes, the bigger government becomes, the more interest groups that get involved in it. Remember, if government is only making very few decisions about our life, then we really don't need to try to lobby them to make to influence their decisions, because they're not making many decisions in our life. But if government is playing a bigger role, if government is getting bigger, they have more regulations, they have more stuff that they're doing, then obviously they're playing a bigger role in our life, and we want more of an influence on them. I think of it as, I guess with my parents. I'm not living at home, nor have I for 20-some years. My parents no longer have much influence on my life when it comes to rule making and decisions. It might be opinions, but and advice, but it's not, here, you need to do this stuff. But when I think of my own kids, I have a lot of influence on their life because I'm the one who pays for the car, and I'm the one that says, yeah, you got to be home at this time or whatever. Okay, so I'm bigger government in their life than my parents are in my life. So they try to influence my decisions more through, discussions or tantrums or whatever they do. You know what I mean? When they start graduating and moving out on their own and making all the decisions themselves and living, then all of a sudden I become smaller government. That makes sense? But you want to influence. If government's making decisions that are affecting your life, then you want to have some say. As government becomes bigger, then they're influencing more aspects of society. And that means that more interest groups are affected by that. And then they want to do something. Now, here's a question that's probably unrelated, but I have never been able to figure this out. Is this wrong? Should it be effect instead of affect? Did I spell that incorrectly? So is this correct or incorrect? This is correct. This is correct strictly by chance, not by skill. I mean, that's because you will probably notice I use the different versions of it at different times. And if you notice it's wrong, you can, one, think less of me, which is big deal. I mean, what are you going to do? Two, correct me. Or three, just pity me and say this guy's not that smart. Any of those three options are doable options. But if you correct it, then I'll fix it later. So at least the next people won't have to pity me. But I don't know. And even when you say I'm going to forget which one is which, like now. So one's a verb, but I don't remember which one. Types of organizations, and again, all this stuff is from the book, and it's really just, it's not how it's influencing government, it's kind of a history, if not history, kind of breaking it down a little bit. Institutional interests, and I've never heard anybody call them this other than, AP books, but nonetheless. Individuals or organizations that represent other organizations. Think of it like professional lobbyists is the best way of putting it that. Where you're a lobbyist that you're really not working, you're working for an individual, an interest group, but only because they hired you to work for that interest group. Does that make sense? You're basically a free agent, you work for whoever hires you. And that's not uncommon with lobbyists, especially effective lobbyists. People are good lobbyists who have lots of people who want them to work for them. Membership interests are ones where we're joining for reasons that are not necessarily our business, not necessarily economic reasons. Maybe a better way of putting it than this. I mean, if you look at the Sierra Club, it's an environmental interest group, probably not affecting your business much. Maybe, but probably not. NAACP is a National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, but they're not an economic interest. The Christian Coalition, I don't even know if the Christian Coalition is around anymore, but a conservative group. They had a lot of influence for a while. I don't know. I haven't heard much about the Christian Coalition lately. Lots of times it's a firm, but you may be hiring someone within the firm too. Again, I said this before, but the best lobbyists are former members of Congress. You can make good money doing that. But not only former members of Congress, sometimes family members of Congress, and that's not uncommon either. Tom Daschle was a member of the Senate for a long time. Linda Daschle, his wife, was a lobbyist for the airline industry for a long time. Now, they had kind of an agreement that she wouldn't lobby the Senate, but she lobbied the House. but and I think is how it worked. And I don't know if it was illegal for her to lobby the Senate, but they didn't. But family members are oftentimes lobbyists also. And former people who work for them, work on my staff, and now you're going to be a lobbyist for something. There are incentives to join this. Now, lots of times there's incentives to join an interest group. Otherwise, we have what are called free riders, or the idea of free riders, which means that you benefit from that interest group even though that you haven't really donated anything to that interest group. I told you about yesterday that I'm not a member of the NEA. The NEA, the National Education Association, or the SDNEA, which is South Dakota NEA, I benefit from what they do. I'm essentially a free rider there. I don't get some of the incentives that they have, but when they negotiate contracts, that benefits me. I don't have any say. I don't get to vote. They'll do a negotiation of a contract, and then the members get to vote. And I'm not a member, so I don't get to vote on that. But I still benefit. That negotiation team, I benefit from that. And I'm not part of the NEA mostly for political reasons. I used to be a member of the NEA for a long time. And I have nothing against the NEA, except for I didn't like some of the candidates who they were supporting for office. And I'm saying, you know what, some of my money that's going to the NEA, that I don't have any choice. If I join them, I got to give them that money. And that money is going to support candidates who I oppose. And it bothered me. And after a while, I said, screw it, I'm just not going to join. But I feel guilty about not joining when it comes to negotiation time. Some of my friends are negotiators, and I try not to say anything to them because I feel like, you know what, I could be a part of this, but I decided not to. But nonetheless, sometimes they don't want a bunch of free riders because people like me, free riders, I'm not giving any money to them. Right? So I'm benefiting from them that I'm not giving any money to them. However, so then they'll have incentives. And some of those incentives may get people to join where they may not join without. It'll kind of eliminate some of that free riders or at least reduce that. And some of them are solidarity incentives, which is essentially companionship. The American Legion. Why do people join the American Legion? I mean, it's a Veterans Affairs thing, but, a lot of people join because they want to meet at the American Legion Club. They want to be with other people there. The VFW in Brandon is not like that because the VFW is kind of like a bar, but it's open to everybody. But it was strange when I came to Hot Spring, or when I came here, and said that you can go down to VFW and eat. They don't have a restaurant there anymore, but they used to. But you can go down there, and I go to VFW occasionally. But I'm not a veteran. Now your dad is, because I've seen him down there occasionally, and some Veterans Affairs things or whatever. Right? Yeah, they have like fundraisers and different things. But the VFW in most places is you got to be a member, and to be a member, you have to be a part of, you got to be a veteran of foreign wars, hence the VFW. But it's a meeting place. I have a friend who bartends down there, and on Wednesday night, apparently, it's like, I don't know, it's like gambling night. They have like gambling stuff, but he goes, I don't make any money because people come down there, but they don't buy anything. They'll have like a pop, and I make money off tips or whatever. And that's the only night he works. But again, it's a voluntary, it's a companionship place. We're going to go meet with other people. We're going to do stuff. Solidarity one. PTA may be part of that too. Material incentives are ones where you actually get something more than just companionship from it. That if you're not a member, that you're not going to get. AARP is a good example of that. If I remember the AARP tax advice, they'll give you travel things if you're older, tips, different stuff like that. It gives you the things that you get from being, part of that particular interest group. Teachers union is another one with that falls under that same thing too. I told you I'm not a member of the NEA, but so I'm not part of the negotiation thing. But other thing is they give insurance and they have legal stuff. Like if I would get in trouble in school for something, if I hit Isaiah today, which I probably shouldn't do, if I hit Isaiah today, and I'm in trouble, if I'm a member of the NAA, I have a lawyer that's going to work for me. I have somebody there that I have liability insurance, and I have a lawyer that works for me. If I don't, which I'm not, then me hitting Isaiah means that I'm going to have to get my own lawyer. You know, if your mom decides to sue me or whatever, I'm trying to fight if I'm going to get fired or not. So there is some incentives, there's some reasons to be a member of the NEA. They always advise young teachers to join because if something happens, you have some legal advice to help you out. Maybe. I'm not real familiar with Groupon, so I don't know. But it's things that you would get that if you're not a member, you won't. Now, again, NEA, there's advantages I have from that the NEA that I gain from them, even though I'm not a member. But there's certain things that I don't have, and those are some of the more material things. They're going to give you some of the stuff. Purposeful incentives are just you believe in the cause. You know, we see this a lot in social issues. You're believing in the cause itself, and that's what you're getting out of it. You're an environmentalist, and the Sierra Club is a purposeful thing. You may not get anything specifically from that. They're not going to give you legal representation or tax advice, but you like what they stand for, you like what they're doing. You know, so we see this more in social issues more than others. And I don't know where the NRA falls under this. What do you think? NRA, obviously for gun rights, but I don't think they offer, I mean, they send out newsletters, they have different things, but I don't know if you get, I don't know, who's an NRA member in here? Any? What, do you gain anything from being part of the NRA? You're going to get those if you're not a member anyway, though. Like if I'm in favor of gun rights, then I'm going to get that protection that the NRA is, you know, giving if I'm a member or not. But I don't know if those are, you know, I think it still falls under purposeful. Yeah. You get free shooting at gun clubs? But if it is reduced rates at gun clubs to shoot, then it becomes you know, some kind of monetary assistance. Then it becomes a material incentive versus. And I don't know how the NRA works when it comes to that. When it comes to social movements, sometimes we get a demand for change. The civil rights movement is a good example. Maybe same-sex marriage, same-sex issues is another one. When we have a demand for change for things, sometimes then social movements lead to interest groups. And just some examples. You don't have to write all these examples down, but have civil rights ones in there. But feminist organizations, the feminist movement then leads to interest groups that deal with that. Yeah, I don't know of any, I don't know by name any interest groups that deal with same-sex issues. I know there's a Log Cabin Republicans, which is a gay rights like group within the Republican Party, but I don't know if they're considered, if you'd classify them as an interest group. I'm sure there are, I just don't know any by name. You know, environmental movement, we start to have some. NAACP on the would be a good example, though they've been around for a long time, but dealing with you know, with race equality, you know, with civil rights, things like that. So we start to see, you know, social movements may lead to different groups being created. let's keep going. I know this is dry stuff, but it's stuff that we gotta, I think, get through. Just because it's dry doesn't mean it's not important. It's just a little uninteresting, or it can be. Maybe it's just uninteresting to me. Some of the background. I think it's more interesting what they do, less of where they get their money and stuff like that. But where do interest groups get their money? Well, some of the money they get comes from foundation grants. And there are some grants organizations that have a lot of money that they give out to different people. The Ford Foundation is a big one. You'll see them advertised sometimes as the money to produce this came from the Ford Foundation or whatever. Sometimes you see that on PBS or something. That's some of the money they'll get from. I mean, obviously they get the money from their individuals themselves. But where else do they get money from? And they need money. Interest groups to be effective really got to have money, because they got to be able to produce stuff, whether it be commercials like we see with some groups like the AARP and the NRA. I mean, those are kind of important things that to try to influence public policy because they can get people then involved. But it might be newsletters, it might be conventions, it might be different things. But the money aspect is important in a lot of things in America. It's hard to get your voice out there if you don't have any money at all. Federal grants and contracts. Sometimes interest groups will do the work of the government. And a great example of that, Lutheran Social Services. They run a number of community projects. A lot of adoption things go through Lutheran Social Services, I would say. The National Alliance for Business, I didn't realize this one, that this was in your book. Youth programs that the government wanted to create. We want some youth work programs here. Well, who's most likely to run it? They could create a new division, or they could say who's already there. Who comes and speaks for Mrs. Main class? Economics, they come like once a week. Junior achievement. Now, I don't know if this is an example of this, but let's say the government is looking for, what does junior achievement do? I'm not even sure what they are. Obviously, it's economic, but what is it? So educating on, like, what aspect of business? Okay. Okay. Now, I don't know if this fits under the same thing, but if the government wants some of this because they want to promote this, they could go to the businesses, they could go and do the stuff themselves, create something to do this, or they could find someone who has already got this and say, all right, we'll give you some money so you can come. I mean, here's our goal. We want people, more kids involved in business, and thinking about it, to promote the economy. But you already have what you need to get this out here, so we're going to give you a grant to do some of that stuff. Again, I don't know if they get that from the government, but that's an example where they could. Direct mail is another way. We're going to mail out to people and say, hey, give us some money. Or would you please? Probably not give us some. But nonetheless, do this all the time. I get the Fraternal Order of Police. I get calls for them yearly because I typically give them money. I'm not a member. I'm not a police officer, but I like the fact that no one's robbing me on a daily basis. And I do appreciate what law enforcement does in society. So I give them money, but I get calls from them all the time now. Every year, the FOP is calling me. And then I give them my donation, and they stop calling, and the next year they're going to call again. And if I don't give them money, they're persistent there. But direct mail or calls to fundraise, interest groups get money on that. And the FOP, the Fraternity Order of Police, I'm guessing I got to classify it as an interest group. They're looking out for the interests of police officers and law enforcement in general. So there's an example. They need at least 2% of all the people they call to make money. I don't know. I suppose you could have volunteers do this, but lots of times you're going to hire somebody, some firm, to make these calls, or the mail. So they got to have some kind of return on those. Either way, and they're also going to get money from their members. But they got to have money to do what they're doing. And as you get into the reading, because I guarantee the reading is much more interesting than what I covered today. When you get into the reading, at least I think it is, it'll get into what do the interest groups actually do. How do they rally their troops, different things like that. That's got to be enough for today, isn't it? Next week we'll get into what interest groups do. And I apologize, it's a little dry, but hey, read your chapters. It's going to be dry in your chapter too. That's the sign of an interesting